Kurtop here, and this is 100 shocking findings that scientists are afraid to study. El Toro artifacts. Hundreds of stone and bone objects are circulating online under the name El Toro. Books made of slabs with embossed covers, masks, figurines with almond-shaped eyes, and tablets with unknown writing. They are supposedly found in the El Toro Hills in Mexico, and the total number of specimens is sometimes estimated at several thousand, sometimes even up to 20,000. Some of the artifacts are indeed skillfully crafted with precise carving and repeating motifs. On the other hand, there are no published excavation reports with coordinates, stratigraphy, accompanying ceramics, or laboratory dating that would allow us to distinguish genuine antiquities from modern artifacts. El Toro artifacts are often compared to the Ica stones from Peru, also a mass collection, also themes of misplaced knowledge, also a controversy over authenticity. El Toro is surrounded by expedition reports from enthusiasts and even mentions of laboratory tests, but verifiable publications in specialized journals and museum attributions are non-existent. Until proper reports and dating are available, it's simply a huge pile of privately owned artifacts. Beautiful, of varying sizes, but unsuitable as a source for ancient history. And another important clarification, don't confuse the Mexican El Toro with the Spanish cave, Cueva del Toro. The Spanish site is a classic example of archaeology, layering, context, dating, publications, including works on double-edged bone tools and Neolithic economy. This is precisely what the evidence base looks like, and this is precisely what the Mexican El Toro lacks. Amazing discovery in Lake Michigan. Who hasn't heard of Stonehenge? Huge stones standing in a circle with a base that is not reinforced by anything. The purpose of this installation is still unknown, and a similar structure was found in 2007 at a depth of 12 meters in the Grand Traverse Bay, Lake Michigan, USA. Initially, the purpose of the expedition was to search for sunken ships using a new generation of sonars. Scientists found this strange structure underwater, and they did not expect at all that they would stumble upon such a historical monument, which most likely is more than 9,000 years old. Studies have revealed that many stones bear mysterious drawings that most of all resemble the figures of extinct animals. Several hypotheses have been put forward, which of the peoples could erect such a structure, but so far none of them has been confirmed. Who paid for the revolution? 1917. The Russian Empire collapses. Power passes to the Bolsheviks. Lenin, Trotsky, new slogans, new orders. Everything seems spontaneous. The will of the people, the uprising of the masses. But one question still remains without a clear answer. Who paid for it? It is officially believed that the Bolsheviks were financed through party fees, donations, and help from sympathizers. But this does not explain the volumes. Publishing newspapers, renting buildings, weapons, logistics, transporting leaders, security. All this requires money, big money. Where did it come from? There is a version about funding from Germany. They say that the Kaiser's general staff wanted to destabilize Russia and thereby withdraw it from the war. Lenin was allegedly given money. A sealed carriage from Switzerland was organized and security was provided. This version is confirmed by many indirect sources, but there are no direct documents, or they were destroyed. Another theory talks about the West. Wall Street bankers, the English, the old believers. They say that the revolution was beneficial to those who wanted to bring down the old order and invest in a new one, controlled chaos. There are even names: Jacob Schiff, Olaf Aschberg, Morgenthau. But again, there is little evidence. Everything falls apart into hints and coincidences. The strangest thing is, 100 years later, we cannot say for sure how one of the largest political transformations of the century was financed. We know who walked the streets, who seized the palaces, but we do not know who printed leaflets and paid for the trains. Maybe the revolution is not only a struggle of ideas, but also invisible money, and those who know how to bet on the future. Ocean signs. Oahu, Hawaii. At Army Beach in Waianae, the ocean has once again pulled back a layer of sand, revealing a long panel of 26 petroglyphs, anthropomorphic figures, lines, and gestures under the low tide. They were already visible after the 2016 storms, but this summer the entire scene was revealed. About 35 meters of sandstone carvings, in places covered with bright green algae, so that their contours are visible even in the shimmering water. Dating is difficult, but archaeological evidence from the area points to a period of 500 to 600 years, a time when the WWII coast was already inhabited and maintained its own ceremonies and correspondence with the sea. Local tradition keepers read a ritualistic history into the composition. The main figure has one arm raised, the other lowered, a sign of sunrise and sunset. 8 figures are clearly male, the rest have no discernible gender, which could also be part of the narrative rather than a mistake by the carver. The beach here changes year after year, and storm cycles literally turn the pages of this stone, sometimes revealing it, sometimes hiding it. The face of ancient power. West bank of the Nile near Aswan. On the Gebel Kurna hill, archaeologists have uncovered a panel of rock art beneath a layer of rubble and uncovered something rarely seen in Egypt, a scene with a boat and the figure of a ruler in a palanquin, possibly one of the earliest portraits of a pharaoh from the formative period of the state. The shape of the boat, with its high extremities and knife-shaped stern, matches ritual vessels of the late pre-dynastic/early dynastic period, circa 3200 to 3000 BC. A detail that has sparked debate among researchers is the elongated chin and a stroke on the head of the seated figure. These are interpreted as allusions to the royal attire and ritual beard of the early dynasties. Stylistically, the scene is compared to the mace of Narmer. If the parallel is correct, we are looking at a visual symbol of royal power at its very inception. The value of this find lies in its rare example in Egypt of a direct, non-figurative depiction of a ruler outside the tomb's interior, on an open rock, literally by the road. The boat is sailing against the current. People are pulling on a rope, and a priest at the stern is adjusting the course. Power as movement and as shared labor. We see not a statue from a museum, but a living note in the margins of an early state. Church seal from the 13th century. In Suffolk, England, Paul Henderson and his 10-year-old son George went on a search expedition to the fields of Woodbridge. Arming their son with a metal detector, they did not keep themselves waiting. Within 10 minutes, the device gave a signal. At a depth of 12 centimeters, George discovered an unusual flat, oval-shaped object with pointed corners, which shocked his father. This item surpassed all previous finds of George, who has been involved in this hobby with his father since childhood. Paul, as a history buff, immediately recognized the item as a copper medieval seal. It is decorated with an image of the Virgin Mary and Child and a Latin inscription indicating its affiliation with the Batley Monastery. Returning home, father and son turned to the coroner, who confirmed that the seal dates back to the beginning of the 13th century and has great historical value. The seal was later sold at auction for £4,000, with the proceeds divided between George and the owner of the field.
Forgotten civilization. On one of the plateaus in western India, far from cities and tourist routes, archaeologists have discovered petroglyphs that, according to preliminary estimates, are more than 12,000 years old. They are carved directly into the stone surface. The figures are strange, as if stylized people with elongated bodies, heads, and arms that are more reminiscent of something else. Some of the images evoke direct parallels with the mythology of Sumer and the Indus civilization. A similar image is found on seals found in Mesopotamia. There it is interpreted as a celestial being, a mediator between the worlds. And here is the same silhouette, suddenly, on the Indian plateau, thousands of kilometers away. Scientists are cautious in their assessments. They talk about the coincidence of forms. They say that we cannot yet talk about a single culture. But there is another point of view. Perhaps these images are the last trace of a civilization that we know nothing about at all, which lived long before writing, before the Vedas, before the Indus culture, and its traces remained only on stone. There are more questions than answers. Who carved them? What do they mean? Why are they so similar to images from other parts of the ancient world? And how did it happen that these signs were literally underfoot, but almost no one knew about them? An unprecedented hoard. South Moravia. While excavating on the outskirts of a village, archaeologists stumbled upon a pit containing a dense stack of objects arranged in layers. Their first impression was of a workshop, but the layout suggests otherwise. It was indeed a hoard, deliberately hidden. At the top lay bronze bracelets and rings, followed by axes with spruce spikes, a pair of chisels, sword fragments, and several ingots. At the bottom lay a compact bundle of thin bronze strip, twisted into a roll.
Nearby, they found pieces of a smelting crucible and drops of metal. Apparently, the owner was a craftsman and was hiding not treasures, but working capital, raw materials, and common molds. The dating confidently points to the late Bronze Age. This is supported by the types of jewelry, the casting marks on the axes, and the chemistry of the alloy. Tin in the typical regional proportions with traces of arsenic and nickel. Several items clearly had been used, the edges are filed down, and there are repair rivets. Such hoards were hidden during times of threat or before migration. Sometimes the owners simply never returned. The find is called unprecedented, not because of the gold. The key factor is the completeness of the assemblage and the absence of later interventions. The layer is sealed like an envelope, allowing one to trace the order of its placement and reconstruct the owner's logic. Such assemblages reveal how the Bronze Age economy worked in practice, what was considered liquid, how people balanced jewelry and tools, and the routes of metalworking. Inside an Egyptian hawk mummy. American explorers studied the mummy of a bird, which was considered the remains of a hawk. It turned out that under the cocoon are the remains of a sacred ibis, which even partially preserved soft tissues and feathers. According to scientists, this find, which was kept in an educational institution for a long time, is about 1,500 to 2,000 years old. Interest in ancient Egyptian animal mummies has increased in recent years. Moreover, it became possible to make three-dimensional reconstructions of their internal structure without violating their integrity, using X-ray computed tomography. Human mummies are also actively studied by this method. For example, recently Egyptologists for the first time examined the mummy of Amenhotep I and found out that its remains were badly damaged by tomb robbers and also enlightened two ancient Egyptian mummies from the Valley of the Kings. Graduate student Carol Ann Barsity of Cornell University examined a supposed bird mummy that was in her school's collection labeled as a hawk mummy. The exact origin of this artifact remains unknown, as there is no record of its arrival at the university. As a result of the study, they discovered that under the cocoon there are indeed the remains of a bird, which even has preserved some soft tissues and feathers. It turned out that one of the legs of this bird was broken even before it was mummified. In addition, after death, possibly during transportation, its beak was broken. The weight of the mummy turned out to be 942 grams, and its age, according to researchers, is about 1,500 to 2,000 years. Perhaps if in the future it is possible to extract DNA from the soft tissues of this sacred ibis, then scientists will be able to determine the place where it comes from. Rich Phoenician necropolis. In southern Spain, archaeologists have discovered a Phoenician necropolis from the 4th or 5th century BC. The discovery surprised scientists because such structures had previously been found only in Sardinia and North Africa. According to the history blog, the discovery was made in the city of Osuna in southern Spain. Interestingly, the workers who were repairing the water supply were the first to stumble upon the ancient necropolis. They found the walls of limestone crypts, after which the work was temporarily stopped and experts were invited to the site. The latter say that this is a unique find, and not only because the crypts are perfectly preserved. The fact is that such necropolises have never been found in Spain before. At the moment, archaeologists have unearthed 8 tombs with stairs and entrance atriums. Apparently, these were elite burials, as experts say, which have no analogues in the hinterland of Phoenician Spain. The only comparable necropolises were previously found only in the coastal area, which in ancient times was the Phoenician colony of Cadiz. But the city of Osuna is located quite far from the coast. It is located about 90 kilometers east of Seville. According to Delgado, at the beginning of the excavations, experts were sure that there were Roman structures underground. They would be much more in line with these places and history. Therefore, the researchers were very surprised to find tombs and hypogees, that is, underground vaults of the Phoenician era. Amazonian urns. When a tree fell deep in the Brazilian Amazon, the rounded edges of pottery were revealed beneath its roots. Archaeologists uncovered 7 funerary urns. 2 were particularly large. Inside were human bones, along with those of fish and turtles. The urns lay just 40 centimeters below the surface, likely beneath old houses. There are no ceramic lids. It appears they were covered with organic matter that rotted away. The location is Lake Cochila in the municipality of Fonte Boa. Here on the high floodplains, artificial islands were built hundreds of years ago. This wasn't a whim, but an engineering feat. Soil was brought in, mixed with ceramic fragments, and arranged so that the platform would support the house and prevent it from being submerged by floodwaters. The urns were found on this platform. The pottery contains an unexpected mix of techniques, plus a rare green clay, known only from a few places in the region. Why fish and turtles ended up in the urns alongside people remains an open question. This could have been a ritual element, a household item, or a symbol of a connection with water. For now, these are hypotheses. But the site's organization, artificial islands and recurring vessel shapes, suggests a regular practice, not a one-off. The urns are currently in Tefe's laboratory. Organic dating, isotope analysis, and paste comparisons will be conducted. Perhaps a name for the tradition will emerge. Thuringian dagger. After heavy rains near the village of Gütersleben, northern Thuringia, a bronze dagger emerged from the soil. The finder didn't retrieve it and reported it to archaeologists. A restoration workshop in Weimar confirmed that it was a Bronze Age dagger, approximately 3,500 years old. It had a plate handle. The wide, flat heel of the blade was attached to the handle with rivets, usually made of wood, horn, or bone. The technology was complex for its time, casting a bronze plate, honing the edge, grinding the base of the handle, and drilling holes for the rivets. On such objects, the rivet marks reveal how the handle was held in place and whether the blade could withstand the load. Next comes alloy analysis, proportion of tin and impurities, X-rays, and corrosion stabilization. If organic matter remains on the handle, it will be possible to reconstruct the shape of the hilt. The artifact was found without a grave or cultural layer. It was likely pushed to the surface by shifting karst soil after a heavy rain. In any case, it is a valuable find. Direct evidence of crafts and exchanges in central Germany during the Bronze Age. Such daggers could have been working weapons, a status symbol, or a gift to the earth. An examination will reveal the exact scenario. Unauthorized searches are prohibited in the region, and prompt reporting of a find preserves both the object and information about it. After examination, the dagger is planned to be displayed at the Elric Regional Museum, from the field to a display case with a clear history of its origin. The Roman border. At the Schaffbreit site near Delbrück, archaeologists uncovered a multi-layered settlement. Hundreds of post holes, 2 recognizable houses, 2 semi-dugouts, 2 wells, and a separate cremation burial. Approximately 750 finds were recovered from the cultural layer, 600 of which were metal. The organic material was surprisingly well preserved. A fragment of leather and even an insect wing were found along with the wood. One of the beams, bearing clear tool marks, was later reused in the construction of a well, a rare detail of everyday practice. A key find is a buckle from a Roman military belt dating from the 4th or 5th centuries. While it doesn't define the site as Roman, it demonstrates direct contact with Roman material culture. This could have been the home of people who served the empire as mercenaries or a community closely connected to border markets and garrisons. The layout and collection of objects suggest several phases of the site's life. Before Roman influence, during periods of active contact, and during the age of migrations, when connections shifted and dwellings and wells were rebuilt. This is neither a treasure trove nor a temporary camp, but a permanent settlement. A Roman belt buckle, recycled timber, and preserved organic matter indicate a typical economic cycle: building repairs, well digging, and recycling. Roman objects were used for practical purposes when they were readily available and appropriate for the task. Aqueduct on a hill. Tajikistan, a 65-meter hill in the middle of an arid plateau. It would seem that water is the last thing one would expect here, but excavation revealed otherwise. An ancient water supply system runs along the slopes, canals, sumps, and ceramic pipes with a carefully calculated slope. This is no ditch after a rain. The trenches reveal areas where the gutter was lined with stone and coated with rich clay, sometimes mixed with organic matter for better waterproofing. In narrow places, pottery segments the diameter of a wrist were used. They were inserted in a tongue and groove pattern. The seams were sealed and secured with stone wedges. The slope is maintained within fractions of a percent. The water flowed by gravity but did not erode the bed. On a ledge near the summit is a rectangular reservoir with a catchment wall.
Here, water first entered through a sand and gravel filter, and here, the silt settled. Below is a distribution pool from which two branches diverge. One led to the utility area, kitchens, workshops, the other to the upper platform, where archaeologists have documented traces of representative buildings and a sanctuary. This layout is typical of early Central Asian settlements. First, to provide water for the people and craftsmen, then everything else. Where did they get the water? Traces of a channel extend to the foot of the hill toward a seasonal stream. Judging by the test pits, there was a catchment there, a simple water collection system with a stone box that stabilized the inflow after rains. During the dry months, water was drawn from cisterns. Their bottoms are leveled and plastered, and their walls bear characteristic water lines. Direct dating is scarce, but the accompanying ceramics and construction techniques place the system back to classical antiquity and the early Middle Ages at least 1,500 years ago. Oldest photographs of people. Old photographs in family albums can contain rare snapshots of ancestors born in the early 19th century. But who was the very first person to be photographed? Several historical figures whose photographs have survived to this day lay claim to this title. Hannah Stille Gorby. She was born in 1746 and lived in Delaware. Apparently, Hannah was a housewife and farmer. Stille's photograph was taken in 1839, when she was 93 years old. This is one of the oldest photographs of a person that has survived. Conrad Heyer. This man was born in Waldoboro when it was part of the province of Massachusetts Bay. He was born around 1753, although the year of his birth is disputed. It is believed that his photograph was taken in the early 1850s. Mary Monroe Sanderson. Born in 1748 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Mary lived until 1852 when she was 104 years old. Aunt Moser. Her photograph was taken in 1852. At the time of the photo, she was, according to various sources, 103 years old, which also makes her one of the oldest women to be photographed. Ezra Green. Born in 1746 in Massachusetts, Ezra became an army surgeon. He lived to be 101 years old, dying in 1847. Green's photograph is one of the earliest surviving. John Adams. John was born in 1744 and, in addition to serving in the army, worked as a shoemaker. 2 years before his death at the age of 104, he posed for a daguerreotype portrait, which is considered one of the oldest. Baltha Stone. George Washington's Army veteran, born in 1747, posed for a photograph at the age of 103. He died shortly thereafter. John Owen. Born in Salisbury in 1735, Owen lived to be 107, making him one of the longest-lived people ever photographed. Caesar, an African slave, was born around 1737. He outlived several generations of masters during his life. At the age of 115, he posed for one of the earliest daguerreotype portraits of African Americans. Caesar died in 1852, leaving behind a rare record of black life in the 19th century. All of these people have left their mark on history not only because of their long lives, but because their images have been preserved in photographs, allowing us to see the past. Madagascar, 10th century. Southwest of the island, Igorombe region. On the Tenica Plateau, a team from the University of Bern uncovers a whole stone world. Terraces, niches carved into the rock, artificial pools and traces of a quarry, scattered over an area of more than 8 square kilometers. Radiocarbon dating of coal from the cultural layer confidently places it between the 10th and 12th centuries. And here's where things get truly interesting. Individual elements of the complex are eerily similar to Iranian Zoroastrian funerary monuments. Towers of silence, where bodies were left in the open air and the cleaned bones were later transferred to stone vaults. Doorways are visible in the niches of Tenica, and some rooms replicate the layout of Persian crypts. There are no direct remains, which could have been erased by the climate, but the architectural logic strongly suggests the presence of groups with Iranian religious roots in Madagascar in the early Middle Ages. Fragments of Chinese and South Asian ceramics from the 11th to 14th centuries add another layer. The island was so tightly connected to Indian Ocean trade networks that even a settlement 200 kilometers from the coast is part of transoceanic exchanges. If this hypothesis is confirmed, the textbook diagrams of the two sources of Madagascar's settlement will have to be rewritten, adding a Persian connection and land communications across the inland plateau. Funeral ring with the eye of the deceased.
This unique Victorian ring, created in the late 19th century, has the unusual feature of using the glass eye of the deceased as the centerpiece. Dr. Lindsay Fitzharris says the first artificial eyes appeared in the 15th century and were made of gold with colored enamel trim. By the 16th century, Venetian craftsmen had discovered a new way of making artificial eyes from glass that could be inserted into the eye socket. Although the first glass prostheses were quite rough, uncomfortable, and brittle, the Venetian method was considered the best in the world at that time. By the mid-19th century, craftsmen from the Thuringian region of Germany made a breakthrough by perfecting the glass formula to create artificial eyes that were of better quality. However, in the 1940s, glass gave way to plastic, which was less uncomfortable and more durable. Over 100,000 years old. Researchers continue to unravel the mysteries of our evolution, now discovering unusual 115,000-year-old footprints in northern Saudi Arabia. The tracks, preserved in a former mud pit in the middle of the Nafu Desert, have astonished scientists by appearing in a place where such ancient human tracks were not expected. The tracks are estimated to belong to early Homo sapiens rather than Neanderthals, confirming the migration routes of human ancestors in a changing climate. Thanks to a surprising combination of factors, the absence of strong winds and the local climate, the structure of the tracks has remained virtually intact, allowing them to be accurately dated and reconstructed as a short-term stopover by Lake Alatar during a dry period. The site appears to have served as a rest and watering place rather than a permanent settlement, as evidenced by the lack of tool or hunting traces. Some scientists believe that these tracks fit into the general migration route by which Homo sapiens moved from Africa to Eurasia. The new findings change our view of migration routes and clearly demonstrate how nature can carefully preserve the chronicle of life.
Ancient Roman phallus with wings. In Serbia, in the east of the country, archaeologists stumbled upon an unusual Roman artifact. The find is a tintinnabulum, wind bell, decorated with a phallus. This artifact, discovered on the porch of a house in the ancient city of Viminacium, is one of the rare and valuable monuments of Roman history. Tintinnabulums were traditionally hung near doors as magical protection for homes and shops. The artifact found was the second of its kind in the ruins of Viminacium, and its peculiarity is that it was completely preserved. Made from bronze, the tintinnabulum is now preserved in the ground. Its unique configuration includes a magical phallus with wings, legs, and a tail, known as a fascinum. The symbol of the phallus in Roman culture was associated not only with eroticism, but also with good luck, was considered a powerful amulet against the evil eye, and was used to attract prosperity and protection from thieves. Tintinnabulums are part of the apotropaic amulets, which were intended to ward off evil forces and provide protection. Such objects were widespread in the Roman world and could take the most unexpected forms.
Engraving on the knife. Archaeologists in Denmark have discovered runic inscription on a knife dating back almost 2,000 years, which they believe is the oldest runes in the country. The inscription was engraved on an 8 cm iron knife found in a grave under an urn near the city of Odense on the island of Funen. The inscription, made up of 5 characters about 0.5 centimeters high and 3 grooves, forms the word Harila, which means small sword in Old Norse. This find, along with an earlier bone comb, became the oldest runic inscription ever discovered in Denmark. Jakob Bonde, curator of the Odense Museum and archaeologist who made the discovery, initially thought it was an ordinary knife. However, after cleaning with chemicals, it became clear that it contained a word. It's like receiving a note from the past. It's an exceptional find for us and speaks volumes about the development of the early Scandinavian language. The inscription probably refers to the knife itself and not to its owner, of whom nothing is known. This knife is 800 years older than the Jelling stones in Jutland, on one of which King Harold Bluetooth immortalized the memory of his parents in 965.
They ate 11 people. Sierra de Atapuerca, northern Spain. In El Mirador Cave, archaeologists have dissected 2 clusters of human bones and uncovered some of the most detailed evidence yet of Neolithic cannibalism. Radiocarbon dating of several samples confidently places the date at approximately 5,700 to 5,570 years ago. The bones contained at least 11 individuals, adults, adolescents, and 3 children.
The bones were found partly in a natural depression, partly mixed with household debris and animal remains. It is known that the cave was also used as a pen. It is not individual beautiful details that create the picture, but their combination. The bones show cuts and chopping marks where the meat was removed, fractures in fresh bone to access marrow and bone fat, marks of human teeth, and signs of heating. Some of the materials are scorched, and in some places there are traces of boiling. Based on strontium isotopes, several individuals appear to be locals, not foreigners. There are too many coincidences for random bone damage, cuts, fresh fractures, teeth marks, and heat. Together they form a clear picture. The most optimistic theory is that our ancestors encountered other people, butchered and ate the defeated. However, scientists do not rule out the possibility that ancient people could have eaten members of their own community.
Cavemen watched cartoons. A new multidisciplinary study of 50 ancient drawn stones shows that our distant ancestors could create animation. They achieved the desired effect with the help of fire. For analysis, stones were selected that were found on the territory of France, but are now stored in the funds of the British Museum. They are known as plaquettes. These stones are covered with ancient images, mostly figures of people and animals, as well as strange lines. A new study has shown that these drawings were carved on rocks between 14,000 and 23,000 years ago. It is known that they bear traces of thermal damage. According to the authors of the study, such traces could leave a fire from the hearth. The stones were not directly fired, but the nature of the traces indicates that they were located close to the fire for some time. This suggested that the cavemen deliberately set such stones around the fire. They did this with a simple purpose. The flickering of fire seemed to make the figures carved on the stones move and distort, which created a kind of animation effect. In other words, the cavemen were in fact watching the first cartoons in history. Scientists tested their hypothesis experimentally. For this, 3D modeling was used. In virtual reality, the plaques have been recreated in great detail. Modeling helped to look at the engravings as prehistoric artists might have seen them. It turned out that if the stones are placed close to the fire, the flickering of the fire can cause an animation effect. Ancient Roman bridges in the middle of the Russian steppe. The Stavropol-Armavir-Tuapse Railway has long been dismantled in some sections, but its bridges are still standing. In appearance, they look like ancient Roman buildings. They are so impressive with their architecture. The construction of the road itself, which is popularly called Tuapse, began back in 1909. It was built out of necessity. Local merchants needed to establish trade, and using alternative roads was very expensive. In order to finance the creation of the road, a special joint stock company was created. Its shares were owned by the same merchants as well as local Cossacks and peasants. Goods began to be transported along the first section of the road already in 1915, but the route passing through the Veselovsky Bridge began to work only a year later. The amazing bridge impresses people not only today. Reinforced concrete was used in the construction of the structure, which was a revolutionary solution at that time. It is noteworthy that bridges were built according to old plans. Projects of stone bridges with arches were used. The construction was led by specialists from Belgium and Germany, which is why they are also called German among the people. Of the 4 railway bridges, the highest is Veselovsky. During construction, it was cast entirely from concrete, and the arches were created separately. Tourists rarely come here. Most often here you can meet extreme climbers or travelers who like to visit unusual places. You need to look for this unique bridge in the Krasnodar territory. There is a Vasily farm there in connection with which the bridge, which is located very close, got its name. Child sacrifice at Carthage. The fact that the Carthaginians are so merciless that they ritually sacrifice their children to the gods was told by the Roman historian Diodorus. He claimed that in the city of Carthage there was a bronze statue of Kronos with arms outstretched palm up. All the children inside rolled into the fiery pit. The historian even mentioned rich families who bought children from the poor and raised them specifically for sacrifice. For thousands of years, this practice was considered so abhorrent that the Romans and Greeks dismissed it as propaganda. But then archaeologists found evidence in cemeteries called tophets. The tophets contain tiny cremated human bones packed in urns and buried under tombstones with inscriptions that thank the gods. Some archaeologists argue that these were not child victims, but beloved children who died at birth.
The inscriptions on the tombstones asked the gods to hear my voice and bless me. Some of the urns contained the remains of animals that were definitely sacrificed and buried in the same way as children. The skeletons discovered were too few to represent all the stillbirths and infant deaths that took place in a city the size of Carthage 2,000 years ago. The Secret Wife. Berlin, Schloss Buch Church. Under the floor, restorers discovered a single sarcophagus from the late 18th century, carved and gilded, hidden from prying eyes as if its owner had foreseen that it would be sought even after death. All the details matched. This was Countess Julia von Voss, a lady-in-waiting to the legitimate queen and simultaneously the secret wife of Friedrich Wilhelm II. Their secret marriage took place in 1787 with the queen's approval, but their happiness was cut short 2 years later. Julia died of consumption and asked for rest in the very parish church where she was born. The Office for the Preservation of Monuments decided not to open the coffin. An ethical decision was more important than a sensational image, and the preservation of its unique structure was more important than a brief report. But even closed, the sarcophagus speaks of agreements at court, the price of personal will, and memories that can easily be rewritten without material evidence. And it's good that we have it. Mysterious Pit at Stonehenge. Scientists from the universities of Ghent and Birmingham have explored the deep layers of soil around the ancient megaliths of Stonehenge. They used electromagnetic ground scanning methods, as well as a specially created program for semi-automatic data interpretation. As a result, researchers have found hundreds of large prehistoric pits and thousands more in the heart of Stonehenge, challenging our understanding of land use at the world's most heavily explored prehistoric site. Excavations of 6 large pits confirm the assumption of their anthropogenic origin. The largest, more than 4 meters wide and 2 meters deep, is dug into the chalk rock. It turns out that its volume is tens of cubic meters, and digging so much with stone tools in relatively hard rock is quite difficult. The pit is more than 10,000 years old, which means it was dug by early Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who settled Britain after the last ice age, and this is the oldest trace of land use discovered at Stonehenge. Mapping of other large pits shows that they are located on high ground to the east and west of Stonehenge. That is, the place that we used to associate with ritual activities, with druids and priests, was actively visited by people almost immediately after they came to the island after the glacier melted. There are 7 millennia between the earliest and latest pits, whereas the stones of Stonehenge, according to the most daring estimates, are no more than 3.2 thousand years old. It turns out that the social context of the activities of the people who lived in those places changed radically over time, but they still continued to dig holes. It's not clear why. If you can still believe in pit traps in the Mesolithic, then similar structures in the Neolithic look strange. The density of game by this time should have fallen, and in the conditions of developed agriculture, driven hunting in pits does not look quite rational. Digging large holes before the advent of iron shovels is generally labor-intensive, especially in relatively dense chalk. Unusual lead coffin. In northern Britain, archaeologists have discovered the skeleton of a late Roman aristocrat in a lead coffin, as well as the remains of more than 60 men, women, and children who lived in the region more than 1,000 years ago. The discovery could shed light on one of the key periods in British history, as researchers found representatives from both late Roman and early Saxon times with different burial customs. The discovery was made in Leeds at a site discovered last year near Garforth. The location of the cemetery is kept secret to protect against looters. The cemetery was discovered last spring near the site where late Roman stone buildings and structures in the Anglo-Saxon style had previously been found. Among the finds in the cemetery were burials containing individual objects such as knives and pottery, indicating early Christian beliefs and Saxon burial customs. Chemical tests can reveal details about the origins and diet of those buried. Once the analyses are completed, the lead coffin is planned to be displayed at Leeds Museum as part of an exhibition on burial customs around the world. Prison bakery. In Pompeii, archaeologists have unearthed an ancient bakery where slaves worked in very harsh conditions. The place also served as a prison, where they, together with donkeys, ground grain for bread in a closed space with small and lattice windows. Workers added grain and controlled the process while the donkey pushed the millstone. Recesses were found in the floor to coordinate the movements of workers and animals. Historical records describe harsh conditions in mills and bakeries. Apuleius, a 2nd century writer, mentioned workers with painful injuries and chains on their legs. The conditions were also harsh for the donkeys, who were forced to walk in circles around the clock, causing them suffering. The bakery was found in the Regio XIX area of Pompeii, where a fresco with a flatbread and an electoral inscription had previously been found. This is a testament to the hard work of the ancient mill bakeries. The opening coincides with an upcoming exhibition in Pompeii exploring ordinary life in the shadow of Vesuvius. The exhibition highlights those who are often left out of the history books, including the slaves who made up the majority of the population and made significant contributions to the economy and culture of Roman civilization.
Gift to the Inca gods. In Lake Titicaca, archaeologist divers found a box made of volcanic rocks. When they opened the box, they found a llama carved from the shell of a spiny spondylus clam and a small gold leaf that may have been part of a bracelet. Archaeologists suggest that the finds are offerings from the Incas who wanted to propitiate their gods. The box of gifts was immersed in the lake at least 500 years ago. Archaeologists believe that the box was not there by chance. Reef Kakai is located north of Koa. This indicates a spatial relationship between the two sites. Lake Titicaca is one of the popular archaeological sites. Last year, archaeologists found evidence of ritual offerings to unknown deities near the Isle of the Sun by the people of Tiwanaku. They were the most powerful tribe of the Andean mountain range until the arrival of the Incas around the 12th century AD. At the bottom of the lake, researchers found sacrificed llamas, gold and stone jewelry, and ceramic incense burners. These artifacts date back to between 500 and 1100 AD, about 500 years before the Incas came to Lake Titicaca.
The most ancient tanners. While sorting through some 12,000 bone fragments recovered from the Smuggler's Cave off the Atlantic coast of Morocco, archaeologists noticed that some of them were smooth and shiny, as if they were specially shaped by human hands. As a result of additional research, scientists found that 62 found fragments are bone tools, which are from 120,000 to 90,000 years old. Among them are several tools made from animal ribs, which are well known for their use as spatulas for dressing fur and leather. In the same cave, bones of predators were found on which there were traces indicating the removal of the skin. Together, carnivore bones and bone tools represent the earliest known evidence of human clothing making.
2,000-year-old fig. Irish archaeologists have made a surprising discovery when they found the charred remains of a 2,000-year-old fig tree on Drumnach Point north of Dublin. The find is important evidence that the Roman Empire, which once considered Ireland untouchable, did have an impact on its culture. Drumnach Point was a key point of contact between Ireland and Roman-ruled England. The fig was the most surprising of the finds made by researchers from University College Dublin. The seeds of the fruit confirm that it was brought to the island at a time when such exotic fruits were considered rare. Figs had previously only been found in medieval strata in Ireland, but this is the oldest known. As well as the figs, traces of spelt were found, a grain widely consumed in Roman Britain but rare in Ireland. The finds show that the Romans not only traded goods but also transferred lifestyles. Archaeologist Christine Baker said that the people of Ireland at the time enjoyed spelt bread, olive oil, wine in used glass, and ceramic dishes, brooches, and beads. Figs, first grown in eastern Turkey and northern India, were carried by ancient trade routes to the Mediterranean, where they became an important part of the Roman diet. Researchers believe that figs and spelt may have been brought through Roman Chester, a major trading post in Britain. Excalibur of Islamic origin. In 1994, an ancient sword was discovered in Valencia, on the east coast of Spain, the age and origin of which had long remained a mystery. Finally, in honor of the 75th anniversary of the Valencian Department of Archaeology, experts carried out an in-depth analysis of this and other artifacts from their collections. Using modern dating methods, experts have determined that the sword dates back to the 10th century and was made during the Islamic era in Valencia. Finds of such swords in the region are extremely rare due to the characteristics of the local soil, which makes their preservation difficult.
The project leader, archaeologist Jose Miguel Osuna, noted that the length of the sword blade is 45 centimeters. A special feature of the weapon is its handle, decorated with bronze plates and notches, which is characteristic of the Islamic period. The absence of a guard and the size of the sword suggest that it belonged to a mounted warrior from the times of the Andalusian Caliphate and also bears the features of a Visigothic weapon.
Traces of the gods in the Temple of Ain Dara. In northern Syria, in the arid lands, there is a unique archaeological site of Ain Dara, a complex of buildings around a majestic central temple, which in its characteristics has no analogues. One of its remarkable features is the giant footprints on the threshold, which are up to 1 meter long, clearly indicating their non-human origin. According to local residents, the traces were left by a deity, and the temple resembles the biblical description of the Temple of Solomon. Temple dating from the Iron Age of the Syro-Hittite kingdoms, which arose after the collapse of the Hittite Empire around 1180 BC and existed until 700 BC, was opened in 1955. Archaeological excavations have made it possible to study its structure and decoration in more detail. The temple rises on an embankment and is surrounded by a gallery. Its foundation is made up of massive basalt blocks. The walls are decorated with intricate carvings depicting geometric patterns and mythical animals, demonstrating the great skill of its creators. The entrance is guarded by lions and sphinxes carved from stone. However, it has not yet been established to whom exactly the temple was dedicated. There is an assumption that it could be dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, but there is no exact data. Giant human footprints not only confirm the structure's connection with ancient myths and deities, but also emphasize its cultural, religious, and mystical significance. However, in 2018, a huge part of this temple was destroyed by airstrikes. Black Pyramid. A stone pyramid from Ecuador with an inlaid eye at the top, 13 steps and small symbols at the base often appears in collections of out-of-place artifacts. It was allegedly discovered in the 1980s near La Mana, Cotopaxi province, along with hundreds of strange objects. The eye glows under a UV lamp. On the base is a drawing of the Orion constellation and prehistoric writing. The artifact is attributed to private collections, including the Klaus Dona Circle and the Crespi collection. The problem is that the object has no published archaeological context, no excavation report, no layer coordinates, no museum inventory history. This is a major red flag for archaeology. The fact of UV glow in itself proves nothing. Many minerals and modern pigments fluoresce under black light. The reference to 13 steps in Orion is an interpretation of appearance, not a dating indicator. The key is provenance. A significant portion of the Ecuadorian wonders revolve around the collection of the priest Carlos Crespi, Cuenca, to which locals donated antiquities for decades without recording their findings. As early as the 20th century, a number of researchers and journalists labeled a significant portion of this collection as fakes or late artisanal artifacts, and the collection itself remained outside the scope of normal scientific publication. True anomalous objects inevitably leave a trail of documentation, location, layer, accompanying ceramics, charcoal for dating, laboratory reports, publication in a specialized journal, and museum inventory. The Black Pyramid lacks this. A sword for the immortals. This is not just a weapon. This is a sword created at the turn of the eras, when China was split into dozens of warring kingdoms. But someone in the midst of this cruel reality made something else. Not for battles, not for victories, but as if for a ritual. The blade is bronze, but with a turquoise tint, as if the metal had absorbed the color of the sky. The handle is carved from rock crystal, transparent as ice. It is inlaid with gold details and turquoise inserts. Geometry, ornamentation, decoration. Everything is so thought out that it becomes clear. The sword was not created for a soldier's hand. It was created for something higher. The Warring States period is the 5th to 3rd centuries BC, a time of constant war, betrayals, and great reforms. But this sword is out of context. It speaks of a ritual. It could have been used in sacrifices, in rites of passage, or as a symbol of power that needed to be proven, not held. It is these artifacts that are confusing, because they do not fit our idea of the ancient world. We expect crude blades and battle scars. Instead, we get crystal, gold, and metal carved like jewelry.
A jar with a rooster. During excavations in central Moscow, a small lipstick jar with a relief rooster was unearthed, an urban accessory that instantly transports us back to the mirrors, fragrant ointments, and cosmetics of centuries past. These containers were made of ceramic or glass, sealed with a ground-in lid, and used to store rich lip and skin preparations, sometimes even scented balms. The wear and pigment marks reveal how much use the jar had received. The rooster on the lid is more than just decoration. In European symbolism, it signifies wakefulness and good fortune. In the urban environment, it functions as a personal symbol of the owner and also as the voice of the morning, when one should appear before others as one's best self. It is from such small details that a portrait of the city emerges, with its smells, workshops, markets, and the habit of wearing small emblems of the day. Gold bars in Normandy. Excavations at a small Iron Age agricultural settlement in northwest France have led to a number of unexpected discoveries. Archaeological research on the banks of the Orne River in Normandy has been going on for several years. Scientists have established the boundaries of the place where the settlement was located, which existed in the Neolithic. One can definitely say people remained in the same place in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age, and even when the legions of Rome came to Gaul. French archaeologists have unearthed residential buildings and outbuildings which were previously dated to the 2nd century BC. Plant remains collected in storage pits showed that the inhabitants of the settlement grew barley, millet, einkorn wheat, and peas. Using the methods of archaeozoology, scientists determined the type of animal husbandry, mainly cattle as well as goats, pigs, and sheep. In addition, in one section of the moat that encloses the settlement, they found the remains of carcasses of pigs and sheep without traces of butchering, which raises questions from experts. It could have been a sacrifice, but perhaps this was how the carcasses of sick animals were disposed of. Scientists also unearthed an Iron Age necropolis on the territory of the settlement, which was used for burials for almost 300 years, from about 540 to 250 BC. The main type of burial there is inhumation, but there are also several secondary cremation burials dating back to the 4th century BC. Apparently, for some time, the two burial practices coexisted. This usually indicates representatives of different religions, which often means different ethnic origins. The most amazing find of archaeologists was not even a necropolis. In the corner of the ditch that encloses the settlement, they found 29 ingots of gold, silver, and copper alloy. Preliminary dating, 50 to 20 years BC. Similar ingots have already been found in Normandy, and according to some scholars, they were not intended for use in jewelry, but as a means of payment, which is functionally close to coins made of precious metals. Treasures of the Roman Witch. An absolutely extraordinary find made in Pompeii. In one of the relatively recently excavated houses of the Roman nobility, a treasure was found with many valuable things, but their physical value is not too great. Beads, a figurine in the form of a penis, 2 mirrors, a necklace, decorative elements made of glazed ceramics, bronze, bone, and amber, and an amethyst-carved female figure. However, the person who hid it took care of the safety of the treasure. It was clearly extremely dear to him. Historians suggest that we have a set of sorceress, and she apparently was a servant or slave. Most likely, the woman hunted with rituals designed to increase fertility and could also send spells. The fact that all these things belong to a poor woman is especially pleasing to archaeologists. They do not often manage to look into the world of ordinary people. But most of the work in connection with this treasure, of course, will be the work of specialists in the religion of ancient Rome. They too are not often lucky enough to learn the unofficial underground aspects of an ancient cult. War Cauldron, Brandenburg, and der Havel. In a courtyard near Gotthardkirchplatz, archaeologists uncover a layer of old half-timbered buildings and unearth a copper cauldron. Inside is not a hoard of hundreds of coins, but just 3 silver discs, but they reveal more about the past than books. They are a Swiss Dicken from Zug from 1610 with St. Oswald, a Reichstaler from 1618, the very beginning of the 30 Years' War, and a Hamburg city coin from 1634 bearing the name of Ferdinand II. 3 mints, 3 routes, Switzerland, the Netherlands, northern Germany, and Hamburg. This geography reveals how money circulated in devastated Central Europe alongside fugitives, mercenaries, artisans, and merchant convoys. Why are there only 3 coins in this large cauldron? The simplest explanation is that the owner had only just begun collecting reserves and didn't have time to return for them. Another possibility is that the valuables were divided into several hiding places to avoid losing everything at once, and this spot was just one of those compartments. Near the find are slag, drops of solder, and fragments of non-ferrous metal. It seems a craftsman worked here, for whom the cauldron was an ordinary tool until the war turned it into a safe. This small set clearly captures the spirit of that era. People always prepared for war, epidemics, or anything else, stockpiling for a rainy day. Sometimes the past isn't chests full of thalers, but 3 silver coins hastily hidden to survive until tomorrow. Remains of Jesus' brother. A 2,000-year-old ossuary with the inscription, "James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus," has been discovered in Israel. This has sparked a heated debate. Perhaps the box contained the remains of James the Just, the first bishop of Jerusalem and brother of Jesus. Today, the artifact is on display in Atlanta among 350 ancient relics from the time of Christ. However, its authenticity remains in question. The owner of the ossuary, collector Oded Golan, was accused of forging the inscription, claiming that he added the phrase, "brother of Jesus." But after a multi-year trial, the charges were dropped, although the judge clarified that this does not prove the authenticity of the artifact. If the inscription is real, the ossuary will be the oldest material evidence of the existence of Jesus. In the 1st century, Jews kept the bones of the deceased in limestone boxes, so the discovery of such an ossuary is not surprising. In 2017, another artifact related to him was found, the ancient text, The First Apocalypse of James. It says that Jesus passed on secret knowledge to his brother, including a prediction of his death. This text was banned because it did not correspond to the canonical New Testament. The largest rock paintings in North America. In 1998 in Alabama, archaeologists found a cave in which they found several fragments of pottery, as well as pieces of coal suitable for radiocarbon dating. The pottery turned out to be similar to samples from the Woodland period, from about 1000 BC to 1000 AD. A group of scientists led by Jan Simic from the University of Tennessee, USA, carried out work to study the ceiling of this cave. I must say it is very low, from 60 centimeters to 1.25 meters. Cave 19 itself in Alabama is huge. It has both vertical shafts characteristic of karst caves and low-ceiling chambers formed by washouts. On the ceiling of just such a chamber with an area of 20 by 25 meters, scientists have identified the largest North American rock paintings known today. Until now, they have not been paid attention to because they are difficult to see. For this, you need to lie on the floor. Simic, on the other hand, applied the method of photogrammetry, which has long been known and widely used for applied purposes, but not in archaeology. The special microclimate of the cave not only provided a canvas for the rock paintings, but also preserved them. The clay layer was preserved by oxidation caused by moisture condensation. What did the inhabitants of pre-Columbian America draw? People and animals. So on the ceiling, the image of a rattlesnake about 3 meters long is quite distinguishable. It is believed that it was a sacred animal among a number of indigenous peoples of the southeast of the modern United States. Scientists have described the 5 largest drawings. In addition to the rattlesnake, there were human figures and an intricate pattern on the ceiling. 2 of the anthropomorphic figures are slightly longer than 1.8 meters. Another is slightly longer than 90 centimeters. These people apparently are dressed in ceremonial clothes and perform some kind of rituals. The researchers suggested that some of the anthropomorphic figures depict not people, but ghosts, and the whole complex of drawings is dedicated to the world of spirits. It is not yet possible to test this hypothesis. Pyramid-shaped ingots. Northern Bosnia on the Sava River. Underwater archaeologists are recovering from the seabed not jewelry or coins, but hundreds of iron bipyramidal ingots. Rare blanks from which knives, arrowheads, and parts for everyday items were forged 2,000 years ago. These double pyramids are rarely found in finds. Previously, single specimens were found in museums in France, Germany, Slovenia, and Sarajevo, but here, an entire warehouse is found. This dates to approximately the 1st or 2nd century BC, a time when local exchange networks were being restructured under Roman pressure, and iron was becoming the main currency of the crafts. The archaeologist's theory is simple. These are sunken cargo. The river was rocking, which could have capsized the barge or even swept the cart into the water during the crossing. The current carried away the lighter goods while the heavy bipyramidal ingots lay in piles on the seabed. The site was measured with reference points and a 3D model was created using photogrammetry. Each ingot was immediately placed in distilled water to slow corrosion. Next comes the chemical analysis. Analysis will reveal what ore was used to smelt the iron and what routes it was transported. If the routes match, the Sava will emerge as a powerful transport corridor even before the arrival of Rome, and Bosanska Posavina will become a hub where iron was transformed into power, weapons, tools, and infrastructure. This is a rare case where a hoard reveals not luxury but production. These are not finished goods, but semi-finished products and logistics, a useful insight into the economy of the time. Such finds provide insight into what was traded and how it was transported.
Skeleton Lake. Hundreds of human skeletons have been found at the bottom of Rupkund Lake in the Indian Himalayas, earning it the nickname Skeleton Lake. The skeletons vary widely in age, and it is still unclear how they all died. Previously, it was thought that they could have been the victims of a single disaster, such as a powerful storm that killed a large group of people. Recent research has only complicated the mystery. Scientists analyzed the DNA of 38 bodies found and found that the remains belonged to people from different eras, thousands of years apart. These people arrived at the lake at different times, disproving the theory that a single group died en masse. The research began a decade ago when geneticist Kumarasamy Thangaraj of the Indian Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology sequenced the mitochondrial DNA of 72 skeletons. Some were of Indian origin, but some of the remains belonged to people with DNA typical of Western Europeans, particularly Crete and Greece. Interestingly, the time range of these finds also turned out to be varied. Most of the bones date back to the 7th to 10th centuries AD, but among them there are also remains dating back to the 19th to 20th centuries. The causes of death of these people remain unclear, which adds to the mystery of this place. The most inappropriate animal of the ancient world. Bonacon, the beast of medieval bestiaries, caused wonder and laughter with his unusual abilities. This creature mentioned in ancient texts spewed fire from its backside, burning its pursuers. The idea of the Bonacone has attracted attention for over 1,000 years, starting with Pliny the Elder, who described it under the name Bonasus. This mythical beast, with the mane of a horse and the body of a bull, used an unusual form of defense by throwing dung over a long distance. Aristotle, having laid the foundations of zoology, also mentioned this animal under the name Menopos, indicating its habitat in Paeonia, a region north of Macedonia. The uniqueness of Menopos lay in its ability to throw excrement with such force that it could form a protective wall around females during childbirth. The question of the real prototype of these creatures remains open. Researchers suggest that encounters with wild bulls such as aurochs or bison could be behind the legend. However, the fantastic details inherent in the stories of the Bonacon, like many other medieval myths, may have been the result of misunderstandings or jokes of ancient observers who sought to surprise or amuse their contemporaries. Birds will tell. Kaya Lipanar is a modern village in Sivas Province, central Anatolia. Beneath it lies Samuha, an important hub of the Bronze Age Hittite Empire, both an administrative center and a sanctuary where decisions were made not only by office but also by ritual. Here, archaeologists uncovered a small clay tablet with cuneiform on both sides and a tiny hole through it, clearly indicating that it was worn suspended by a cord. The format resembles not a book for shelves but a priest's workbook. The text describes ornithomancy, divination by birds, flight paths, calls, time of appearance, and even reactions to sacrificial food were taken into account. For us, this is not ancient exotica, but a direct glimpse into the workings of power, because in the Hittite Empire, such predictions were part of official regulations, influencing wars, dynastic marriages, and treaties with neighbors. A mini-archive was also discovered in the same layers. Dozens of tablets and royal seal impressions of Hattusili III and Queen Puduhepa, a connection that firmly links divination with bureaucracy and demonstrates how religious practice was integrated into political governance. We see how signs were transformed into decisions, where priest and scribe are parts of the same machine. Brewing. The history of beer begins in the Neolithic period more than 11,000 years ago.
It is one of the oldest drinks that accompanied humanity in the early stages of its development. Some scientists even hypothesize that people began to grow grain not for food, but to brew beer. This drink could be not just a way to quench thirst, but also played an important role in rituals and communication. Brewing is mentioned in one of the oldest literary works, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is about 3.8 thousand years old. This text, created in Mesopotamia, shows that beer was already known and valued in society. Beer also played an important role in the legislation of that time. In the Code of Hammurabi, a collection of Babylonian laws, beer establishments are mentioned as places that were especially strictly monitored. The owner of a pub had to maintain order, and if criminals gathered in his establishment, he could be sentenced to death. The ancient Egyptians were also big beer lovers. Pyramid builders received a liter of beer every day for their work. Interestingly, high-ranking officials received as much as 5 liters per day, which emphasizes how important beer was in ancient society. The oldest fortresses on the planet. Traditionally, we thought that complex defensive structures only appeared with the development of agriculture, but now everything is different. 10 hunter-gatherer fortifications dating back up to 8,000 years have been found in Siberia. These settlements, located on the banks of rivers, were protected by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. The ancient inhabitants of this area not only hunted and fished, but also created ceramic vessels for storing food. Their ability to create serious fortifications testifies to the incredible complexity of their lives. Many believed that permanent settlements with fortifications arose in agricultural societies, but this find refutes this theory. It turns out that even hunter-gatherers could create complex societies. The presence of abundant resources in the Siberian taiga likely played a key role in the emergence of these settlements. These fortifications may have been used to control and efficiently utilize local resources. Ammonite amulet. The Romans loved to transform natural oddities into personal talismans, and a find from Galicia confirms this. Archaeologists unearthed a trilobite fossil over 450 million years old in the household trash of an aristocratic home. The stone is unpunctured, so it was likely worn in a metal or bone setting as a miniature family amulet claiming the power of the ancient sea. Researchers also suggest another explanation. The trilobite could have been a token from a board game FS understanding of the tastes of the era's elite. In the ancient world, collecting oddities was fashionable. Emperor Augustus, for example, was as keen on acquiring living fossils as modern billionaires. Such a talisman is not just a decoration, it is a demonstration of control over time. You wear an artifact from the Paleozoic era around your neck, and it is believed to ward off the evil eye and bring good luck. Memorial marks on the bricks of history. The Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur is one of the most majestic structures in India, but its beauty hides dark pages of history. On the inner gate of Lohapole, 15 imprints of women's hands are still visible, silent witnesses to the tragic tradition of sati. Sati is an ancient Hindu ritual according to which widows were supposed to burn on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Sometimes women did this voluntarily, but more often they were forced. This practice was officially banned by the British in 1829, but in India it continued until the 20th century. In 1843, after the death of Maharaja Man Singh, his wives left handprints on the wall before stepping into the fire. However, this is not the only case in the history of the fort. In 1731, 6 wives and 58 concubines of Maharaja Ajit Singh also committed suicide in the flames. Tragedies have been going on since the fort's foundation. In the 15th century, Saint Chidyawale Baba cursed Rao Yoda, saying his land would suffer from perpetual drought. To lift the curse, the king ordered a resident of Megwal, Rajaram, to be walled up alive within the fort's walls. But the curse still seems to be in effect. Maharajas have died here, tourists have fallen, and in 2008, hundreds were killed or injured during a stampede at the Chamunda Devi temple. The teenager found the count's family treasure. A 14-year-old Polish boy named Patrick accidentally discovered Count family documents and valuables hidden in the ground in the forest. The things belonged to one of the most influential Prussian families, the Finkensteins, who owned the estate in Gublavki. For more than 70 years, the found items have lain in the ground in tin cans. Several dozen personal documents and other items were found to be in excellent condition. The main part of the recovered items belonged to Count Hans von Finkenstein, who owned the estate until 1945. Personal documents, a diary from the First World War, as well as the Count's will with the family coat of arms and lacquer seal. Among other things, personal belongings of the Count were found: military uniform and orders, hunting equipment, personal wardrobe items, glasses, pocket watches, jewelry, silverware, as well as postcards, letters, and family photos and albums. The boy's parents immediately reported the find to the local authorities, who handed it over to the Cultural Heritage Protection Service, after which the valuables were transported to the Historical and Archaeological Museum in Elbląg. Information about the treasure was published in 2018, although the discovery itself took place a year earlier. It took time to take inventory and conduct certain studies at the place where the finds were found. A female image of Murom. Russia, right bank of the Oka River, Zviaginsky, to necropolis. It was thought to have been cleared out long ago by illegal diggers, but it still yielded a rarity: a female burial with a nearly complete set of jewelry, a forehead crown, braids, wire temple rings, an open-work plaque on the chest, a thin buckle and pendants on the belt. This is more than just beautiful. Such an ensemble tells everything without words: age, status, who we belong to, with whom we trade. Nearby are imported beads, denarii, and dirhams. Murom was on a trade route, not on the sidelines. The early chambers are long, made of birch logs. The men's graves are rich, with axes, knives, and Hungarian belts. By the 11th century, the scenario changes. Women's attire is slimmed down to a pair of temple rings, sometimes worn on the wrist, and ancient Russian fashions become increasingly evident in their clothing. Even the occasional padlock and key hint at connections from warrior traditions to Scandinavian influence. Lugnano vampire child. A few years ago, American and Italian archaeologists worked side by side excavating a cemetery in Umbria. The burial place was known as La Necropoli dei Bambini, or the Children's Cemetery. Understandably, the work was quite unnerving, but the researchers made a particularly disturbing discovery. They found the skeleton of a child with a rock in its mouth in a rare and macabre example of a vampire burial. The child was about 10 years old, of indeterminate sex, and died 1,500 years ago. He was lying on his left side with limestone the size of a large egg stuck in his jaw. Cement had been smeared on both sides of the stone, which still had visible teeth marks. Archaeologists believe that this ritual was performed in such a way that the child would not rise from the dead and spread malaria. The locals called the unfortunate child the Vampire of Lugnano. This dog is 7,500 years old. Meet Muge, a dog that lived in Portugal 7,500 years ago. This one could well run in your yard, right? The skeleton of this dog was found in the Portuguese town of Muge in 1880 during the excavation of a large Mesolithic monument. Then the find did not attract attention. Scientists were more interested in the ancient people who lived in these territories. There was a burial ground in Muga, which included at least 110 human skeletons. Archaeologists managed to collect the largest European osteological collection of the Mesolithic era. Dog bones were found in a shell mound at a depth of 4 meters. The skeleton was put in a box and safely forgotten about it. The dog's skeleton was rediscovered only 120 years later in a closet at the Lisbon Geological Museum. In 2010, the find was radiocarbon dated, giving an age of 7680 to 7450 years ago. Since then, the dog from Muge has become an important exhibit in the museum's permanent exhibition. Experts determined that the skeleton belonged to a medium-sized adult dog. The height of the dog at the shoulders is about 50 centimeters. A more accurate age of the dog was established by making an X-ray of the skull, from 2 to 6 years, based on the closure of the pulp canals of the canines. More recently, a team of researchers, including renowned forensic reenactor Cicero Marias, has taken on the task of restoring the appearance of the Muge dog. The dog's skull was subjected to a CT scan. A forensic technique commonly used to reconstruct human faces has been adapted to reconstruct a canine face. To recreate the original shape of the skull, its missing parts, and soft tissues, the skull of a virtual donor was used, a modern dog that serves as a guide for reconstruction. The Belgian Shepherd Malinois, male, acted as such a donor. This specimen was chosen because its size and structure roughly corresponded to the skull of a Muge dog. What happened? Judge for yourself. As far as the authors of the work know, this is the first attempt to digitally reconstruct the appearance of an ancient dog that lived in the Mesolithic. England's oldest scientific instrument. Discovered in England, a palm-sized copper quadrant dating back to 1311 was used to tell time. This artifact is 15 years older than Chaucer's famous astrolabe from the British Museum. Researchers point to the rarity of medieval English instruments and their importance for scientific understanding of the era. The device is estimated at $130,000, $190,000. $190,000. It is being offered at auction along with valuable books, manuscripts, and a 17th century silver microscope made by Antony van Leeuwenhoek. Quadrants are believed to have come to Europe from Muslim Spain at the end of the 13th century. In these devices, daytime was divided into 12 hours, the duration of which varied depending on the season and latitude of the place. The first hour began at dawn. Noon occurred at the end of the 6th hour and sunset at the end of the 12th. This made summer hours longer than winter ones. Quadrants were the tools of traders, clergy, and students. It is known that Queen Isabella, wife of Edward II, received several of these devices as a gift in 1358. Quadrant determined the time of day by the altitude of the sun using a trigonometric formula that was accurate at the equator. Despite the errors, the device was useful not only for determining time, but also for solving mathematical problems related to measuring distances and heights. Ancient bison steak. In 1979, gold prospectors in Alaska stumbled upon what they initially thought was just a piece of rock. But beneath the ice was a body, not a human, not a mammoth, a bison, almost intact. They named it Blue Babe because of the bluish tint of its skin caused by the reaction of iron with the surrounding rock. The bison died about 50,000 years ago during the Pleistocene. Judging by the marks on the carcass, it was killed by a cave lion. But the most important thing is how it was preserved. Thanks to the permafrost, the tissue remained dense, almost like jerky. Hair, muscle, skin, everything was present. It was the first step bison specimen ever recovered in this state. When the research was completed, the project leader, paleontologist Dale Guthrie, decided to celebrate with dinner. He took a small piece of meat from the neck, stewed it with onions, carrots, and spices, and served it to his colleagues. The meat was tough with a strong, earthy flavor. Someone described the aroma as mushroomy or glacially damp. No one was poisoned, everyone survived. This incident became legendary because it's not every day that you dine on an animal that died tens of thousands of years before you. And although this was a scientific experiment, not a gastronomic spectacle, it reminds us that the past sometimes returns not in a museum, but right on the table. Ancient manuscript on silk. In the vicinity of the modern city of Changsha, located in the province of Hunan, in 1972 to 1974, archaeologists discovered and excavated the WWII burial ground, which dates back to the early period of the Western Han Dynasty. The researchers found 3 burials there which belonged to the Prince Ho, who owned the Dai inheritance in 185 to 165 BC, and also probably to his son and wife. The most striking of them was the burial of a woman whose remains were found in a mummified state. Scientists have found that she died at the age of approximately 54 from a heart attack. Together with her, archaeologists found numerous sets of clothes, 158 lacquer items, such as furniture, cutlery, and toiletries, as well as silk fabrics and wooden figurines. In addition to things, the accompanying inventory included ancient texts on bamboo and wooden planks, as well as silk scrolls. Among them in particular were works devoted to ancient Chinese medicine and pharmaceuticals, contemplative, gymnastic, and sexual practices. Chinese scientists continue to study the rich collection of finds made in the WWII burial ground. Thus, the latest research included more than 19,000 fragments of fabric and 1,700 lacquer and wooden items found in the burial of the wife of Prince Dai. According to Yu Yanjiao of the Hunan Provincial Museum, this work made it possible for the first time to identify delicate Chinese characters on silk fabrics, which indicate a high level of weaving during the early Han Dynasty. In addition, scientists found images of phoenixes that were embedded in patterns symbolizing longevity. Among other discoveries were dozens of found fragments of manuscripts on silk. Some of these texts, written in Chinese characters, have been identified as part of the 3rd volume of the ancient literary work Xingde. A micro-inscription on a wall. On a cliff in western Iran near a path used for centuries, archaeologists noticed a thin scratch, barely visible in the shadows and almost invisible under direct light. Only after RTI imaging, when artificial light glides across the surface, did it become clear. It was an inscription, a single line, the size of a matchbox, carved with astonishing precision. The letters are neatly arranged without any random glitches. Repeating angles, clear endings, as if carved from memory but with a practiced hand. Dating is approximately the end of the first millennium BC. The meaning is simple, a name and a short invocation to a deity. Just a name and a request, carved into the stone at eye level, not as a declaration but as an action that was significant at the time. The location where the inscription was found was clearly not used randomly. Nearby are cup-shaped depressions, traces of soot, and fragments of pottery. Everything indicates that they stopped here. Perhaps they left offerings. Perhaps they were simply seeking shelter and peace. Sacred tunnels of the Assyrian Empire. During rescue excavations in the village of Bashbuk in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists discovered a system of ancient tunnels carved into the rock. Archaeological work began after the appeal of local residents to the authorities about the increasing activity of black archaeologists near the village. The entrance to the underground complex was found under a modern double-decker house. Archaeologists have dated the object to the first millennium BC, that is, the period of the Assyrian Empire in the region. Many drawings in the Assyrian style were found on the walls of the complex. Scientists believe that the object was religious and sacred. So some rock paintings depict scenes of the procession of Assyrian gods, such as Hadad, the god of rain and storm, Sin, the moon goddess, Atargatis, the goddess of fertility, and others. An unusual feature of the records found is the language used here. The fact is that the inscriptions in the dungeons were made in Aramaic and not in Assyrian. However, this is explained by the fact that for the locals of that time, the Aramaic language was native. Thanks to the operational work of archaeologists, it was possible to partially decipher one of the cave inscriptions. It mentions the name of Mukin Abua, a Neo-Assyrian official from the reign of Adad Nirari III. Scholars suggest that this man was appointed as the ruler of the region, and the underground complex could have been used to house the locals. However, this is still only a working hypothesis. Daggers made from people. Until the end of the last century, warriors from New Guinea used bone daggers in hand-to-hand combat. They were often made from the thigh bones of large flightless birds called cassowaries, but there were some that were rarer and highly prized. They were made from human bones. This revered weapon was made from the remains of people of high status. They were usually the fathers of warriors who apparently donated their bones willingly. Daggers were worn prominently on the biceps, and those made from human remains were much more elaborate and ornate. This gave them more of a ceremonial status than a practical one, but anthropologists wanted to know which type of weapon was actually the best. They tested 11 daggers, 6 from cassowaries, 5 from humans, and found that the blades, made from human remains, retained more of the natural curvature of the bone and were stronger. A tree that survived. Wood rarely survives centuries. Water, oxygen, and fungi destroy it faster than any archaeologist. Therefore, organic finds are always special. They reveal not only the shape of the object but also the hand of the craftsman. In one excavation site in western Russia, a wooden object was recovered from a water-saturated layer, an elongated piece with finger grooves and a carefully planed end. In shape, it resembles a handle or fastening element that once worked in tandem with leather, a bone inlay, or a bronze plate. Fine parallel scratches, marks of a knife and a scraper, are visible on the surface. Their frequency allows one to distinguish the stages of work: rough cutting, subsequent sanding, and, in places, finishing with an abrasive. Microscopy reveals porosity and growth rings, enough to identify the wood species. Birch or alder were commonly chosen. They are easy to work and less prone to cracking during drying. Radiocarbon dating and accompanying ceramics place the assemblage in the late Stone/Early Bronze Age. Immediately after removal, the wood is kept in a damp cloth, then transferred to a bath of polyethylene glycol. This replaces the water in the cell walls with a polymer to prevent the object from warping during drying. Afterward, it undergoes slow vacuum drying. Even during conservation, nuances become apparent. A tiny notch remains on the end, marking the assembly side. On the side, there is a micro hole for a cord or rivet. These are small details, but they contribute to the use scenario. The handle was inserted into a groove, secured with a cord or pin, and operated under load. Unique type of DNA in alien mummies. Three-fingered mummies have been discovered in Peru, establishing themselves as something beyond our world. The creators of the documentary, Serena DC and Michael Mazzola, announced the presentation of unique evidence of the existence of humanoids. The remains found in the mountain mine, according to documentarians, are not a fake and contain DNA that is not similar to the known forms. American scientists in Mexico and Peru have conducted research, the results of which refute the claims of the Peruvian authorities about mummies as a tourist attraction. According to the filmmakers, the discovery could rewrite the history of mankind, becoming comparable to the discovery of the Shroud of Christ or the Ark of the Covenant. The documentarians are convinced of the need for scientific DNA analysis to understand the origins of creatures that are more than 1,000 years old and whose DNA is 30% unknown, indicating possible genetic manipulation. The film suggests that the mummies could be evidence of a new species or even extraterrestrial origin. The creators plan to show images and research results live from the laboratory, calling for a serious scientific analysis of the discovered remains.
First aid kit, which is 2,100 years old. What to hide? The medicine of past centuries, in comparison with the present, looks at least barbaric. The art of healing was quite limited. Leeches, incense, bloodletting, and spells. But recently, something was found on the seabed that revealed the medical secret of those years. A 2,100-year-old shipwreck has been found off the coast of Tuscany. The researchers found there the remains of a fairly large first aid kit, whose age is estimated at about 130 BC. It contained 136 pewter and wooden medicine bottles, as well as cubes and pills. Interestingly, most drugs have a diverse and complex composition. Some pills contained more than 10 different plant extracts. Some were made from pine resin, zinc, starch, and even vegetables. Scientists involved physicians in their work, and they concluded that these drugs are still used today in the treatment of certain diseases, for example, of an ophthalmic nature and the gastrointestinal tract. This discovery allows you to find out the secrets of what a wide range of drugs were used by people before our era, and surprisingly, were quite working. A man in a fox skin. Ulukak Hoyuk, Western Anatolia. 9 centimeters of clay in a very specific image. The man is not naked but wears a fox cloak with a detailed collar and dangling strips of fur. The modeling is smooth, the firing is clean, the edges are tight, the work of a confident hand from a local workshop. The reason for the fox is clear without any mysticism. In Anatolian themes, it symbolizes warmth, hunting, and the right to lead. On the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the bottoms of the figures are covered with fox skin. The distance between the monuments is centuries, but the meaning is the same. Clothing as a symbol of role. Here, status is determined not by the body, but by what is draped over the shoulders. The figurine is domestic. The base is trimmed, indicating it stood on a stand. Small chips indicate it was handled and moved. It lived indoors, not spent centuries in the ground. Traces of ochre are typical of Ulujak on such objects. If the paint is confirmed here, the cloak could have been accentuated by the color. Jade cicada. Here is a jade cicada created during the Western Zhou dynasty. This artifact is not just a decoration, it had a deep symbolic meaning. In Chinese culture, the cicada was considered a symbol of rebirth and immortality, and jade was a stone of eternity. Such a figurine could be placed in the mouth of the deceased before burial, believing that it would help the soul pass into the afterlife and be reborn. Traces of red paint found on the artifact are also important. Red symbolized protection and good luck. The finest carving demonstrates the high level of skill of ancient Chinese artisans. Note the eyes, folded paws, and patterns that give the figurine an almost mystical look. Such objects were part of rituals and reflected the religious beliefs of people of that era. Unique icon for 24 million euros. You can find an artifact not only by digging into ancient graves and lost cities, but also right in your kitchen. An elderly resident of the French city of Compiègne decided to find out how much her old smoked icon that hung over her stove could cost. The woman did not know either the exact name of the painting or its approximate age. It turned out that this is the Mockery of Jesus.
the most valuable icon of the 13th century, painted by the Florentine painter Cimabue. It was possible to prove this thanks to the method of infrared photography. As a result, the picture went at auction for $24 million. The reason for this cost is the uniqueness of the work. It was made at the turn of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and is a magnificent example of proto-Renaissance art which combined the features of two eras and, at that time, one might say, very experimental. A sound from ancient times. In a residential area of Akhenaten, the capital of Pharaoh Akhenaten, built in the desert as a symbol of his new religion, archaeologists discovered something that at first glance might have seemed insignificant. A small bone cylinder, the size of a fingertip, with a carefully cut hole and a chamfer at the mouthpiece. Only upon closer examination did it become clear that it wasn't a decoration or a fragment. It was a whistle. The material is a lightweight tubular bone, likely from a bird or small ungulate. Its surface shows traces of polishing, and inside is a dark coating that forms with prolonged use. Everything suggests that it wasn't simply stored, it was used. It produces a stable tone, and by blocking the hole, the pitch can be changed. Not a musical instrument, but a perfectly functional signaling device. The exact purpose is unknown, but there are working theories. In Amarna, as Akhenaten was called, such objects are found only rarely, and only in residential or artisan areas. It could have been a children's whistle or a toy, or a signaling instrument in a workshop to drown out the noise of the courtyard and signal assistance. There is also a theory about its ritual use. In Egypt, sound often accompanied domestic rituals, processions, and prayers. The whistle is carved cleanly with uniform proportions and bevels. All this indicates that such objects could have been mass-produced in small batches near the bone-carving workshop. Perhaps it was part of everyday life, as common as dishes or a lamp. Each find in this episode is not about a legend, but about a person, about their choice, fear, hope, mistake, about what they did, not knowing that someone would excavate it, and perhaps this is where true archaeology lies. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Bye, everyone.